When Evan Ryder appeared at the Park Service checkpoint near Highway 62 in April 2023, he was almost unrecognizable. Barefoot, emaciated, with long matted hair and beard, and draped in a dusty cloth instead of clothes. The man had gone missing 5 years earlier along with 2 friends in one of the harshest and most isolated areas of Joshua Tree National Park, where all search efforts had ended in despair. But the most terrifying thing was not that he had survived. The most terrifying thing was what he said about those 5 years, about what had happened to his 2 friends, and about what still lies beneath the desert sands. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On July 12, 2018, Joshua Tree National Park reached the peak of its hot season, with midday temperatures hitting 109 degrees Fahrenheit. The air dry and scorching, and the sunlight sweeping down on the granite rock formations, making the entire Lost Horse Valley shimmer with heat. Sparse vegetation, twisted Joshua trees scattered across the golden sand, and towering stacked boulders forming natural rock walls stretching from Hidden Valley to the edge of the wonderland of rocks. In those harsh weather conditions, 3 visitors, Evan Ryder, 29, from Sacramento, Melissa Park, 28, from Portland, and Caleb Monroe, 31, from Denver, stopped their vehicle at the Hidden Valley trailhead at 1:48 p.m. to prepare for a short hiking route. They checked their water, snacks, and camera before heading onto the trail, planning to pass through the Lost Horse Valley area and loop back to the parking lot before dark. The trailhead camera recorded them, leaving the parking area a few minutes later. At 2:14 p.m., a photo taken on a phone showed the group standing in front of a distinctive large rock cluster in Lost Horse Valley, with strong sunlight, short shadows, and light quality consistent with early afternoon. This was the last timestamp recorded from any of the 3's devices. After that, the group turned right, entering an unmarked small trail, just a faint worn path through the dust, sand, and rocks, known only to those with years of experience climbing in the park. From that point, no additional photos, messages, or GPS data were recorded. That same evening, the families of all 3 attempted contact multiple times, but all calls went straight to voicemail. Messages went unread, and devices were offline. By around 11 p.m., the prolonged lack of contact caused real concern among relatives, especially since all 3 had planned to leave the park before sunset and had no reason to overnight in such extreme conditions. As the sun rose on the morning of July 13th, the silence from the 3 continued. At 5:30 a.m., with the safe time frame long past and all communication signals stopped since the previous afternoon, the families officially contacted the National Park Service to report 3 missing visitors at Joshua Tree, providing full identification details, travel itinerary, and the last extractable data from phones before losing connection. Just minutes after receiving the report, park rangers at Joshua Tree assessed the situation as beyond a typical lost hiker case and immediately activated emergency search phase under SAR Level 1 protocol. A temporary coordination center was set up right at the Hidden Valley trailhead parking lot, where main entry paths to the area could be observed and forces easily deployed. Topographic maps, satellite images, and weather data were spread out on folding tables, while the coordination team determined the initial search radius based on the group's last known timestamp and the terrain features around Lost Horse Valley. Temperatures at 6 a.m. had already exceeded 90 degrees Fahrenheit, forcing teams to work in short shifts to avoid exhaustion in the intense sun. The first ranger team was sent along the Hidden Valley Loop in a direct line search formation, maintaining even spacing to scan each terrain strip. Simultaneously, a K-9 team was deployed northeast, where large rock formations create narrow crevices that can easily trap hikers. In parallel with ground operations, a drone equipped with a thermal camera was launched for overhead scanning, focusing on shaded areas, rock gullies, and spots likely to retain lower temperatures than flat surfaces. Data streamed continuously back to the coordination center, but no images showed signs of the 3. From Hidden Valley, The search radius expanded to 3 to 5 miles, covering complex terrain but still within the group's potential travel distance in a few hours, such as the southern edge of Lost Horse Valley and old worn paths leading to Quail Springs. Rangers looked for basic signs of human presence: water bottle caps, fabric scraps, shoe prints on dusty sand layers, rest spots, or any dropped items along the way. However, the dry ground and strong winds from the previous night had erased nearly all traces, making it difficult to track potential routes. Teams continuously reported negative contact upon completing each area. Temperatures rose rapidly as the sun reached its peak, forcing the coordination center to adjust tactics, shifting to fan-pattern searches from high points, including several large boulders and rock outcrops, offering panoramic views of the valley. Some rangers were assigned to check lesser-known side paths, faint trails used by veteran climbers, in case the group had veered onto unofficial routes, as in many previous lost hiker cases. By early afternoon, despite scanning the entire area the group could have reached in 2-3 hours from the last recorded timestamp, results remained completely empty. No clothing, no water bladders, not a single item typically dropped in hiking incidents, no signs of struggle, falls, dragging, or vehicle marks. The entire first day's search efforts led to only one conclusion within the directly checked radius around the last known location. The three seemed to have vanished without leaving any trace. This absolute emptiness forced the coordination center at Hidden Valley to escalate to SAR Phase 2 as soon as the sun rose on July 14th, expanding the search to more inaccessible terrain like deep canyons, dry washes, and boulder fields on the eastern edge of Lost Horse Valley. The second day's goal was to cover the entire transition zone between low desert scrub and granite rock chains, areas that often retain traces despite strong winds. While Joshua Tree's ranger team focused on side trails and rock crevices that could conceal missing persons, support forces from San Bernardino County were mobilized, bringing additional off-road vehicles and personnel trained for extreme terrain searches. These teams were divided into clusters to scan wide washes, where seasonal rainwater once carved deep channels, potentially washing away traces and causing hikers to slip or get stuck. Additionally, a group of local volunteers, including experienced climbers and hikers, arrived at the coordination center, ready to assist in checking complex boulder fields with many hidden spots that regular forces couldn't thoroughly scan in limited time. They were specifically assigned to the Wonderland of Rocks area, where massive randomly stacked boulders form a maze-like matrix of hundreds of narrow crevices and rock pockets, any of which could trap an injured person. At the command center, topographic maps were divided into grid squares for systematic grid search methods, ensuring no overlapping areas were missed. Teams were required to report completed grids, noting surface coverage level, visibility potential, and any unusual signs, no matter how minor. From the air, a San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department helicopter flew circular patterns along canyon edges, monitoring low heat reflection zones that might indicate shade or stationary objects underground. Thermal camera drones continued low-altitude deployments, prioritizing rock debris fields and cracked areas where hourly temperature differences could highlight anomalies. Despite hours of operations, all results returned to the coordination center as no detections. Some teams found deep cracks or large rock crevices with signs of prior climbing, but checks revealed no shoe marks, no fabric snags on rocks, and no evidence of falls or entrapment nearby. In major washes, especially near Quail Wash and tributary branches from Queen Valley direction, teams thoroughly checked bottoms and banks where items could snag if hikers encountered trouble. However, thick sand layers blown by strong nighttime winds had flattened all surfaces, erasing any potential signs from the afternoon of the 12th. A few volunteers used terrain reading techniques to identify human movement signs, like depressed sand or shifted small rocks, but results were unpromising. By mid-afternoon, the search radius expanded to cover nearly the entire triangle between Hidden Valley, Lost Horse Valley, and Old Queen Canyon. With such a large expanded radius, the probability of finding traces should have increased, but instead, teams returned with negative results. No backpacks, no plastic scraps, no water bottle caps, no drag or slide marks on rocks, no personal items left behind, even the smallest like wrappers or torn fabric, commonly found in prolonged lost hiker cases. As the sun set and teams withdrew to avoid exhaustion, the day's consolidated report showed that the expanded efforts on the second search day yielded no direct clues. No signs the group left the area in another direction. No indications of accident at any scan point. 2 consecutive days without results placed the coordination center in a rare situation, a disappearance with absolutely no traces in an area that typically yields at least some minor physical clues in visitor incidents. In the following days, the search radius continued expanding beyond main trails, but results maintained the concerning emptiness. By the 8th search day, after mobilizing all forces from park rangers, San Bernardino County, and volunteer groups without recovering any physical traces related to the 3 visitors, the SAR Coordination Center at Hidden Valley had to enter a full re-evaluation phase, reviewing efficiency of each scanned area and cross-referencing meteorological data, topographic maps, and reports from over 30 teams throughout the deployment. Average temperatures over the 8 days consistently ranged from 106 to 113 degrees Fahrenheit, forcing teams to limit direct sun exposure searches and focus on safer early morning or late afternoon windows, reducing real-time ground coverage speed compared to cooler season missing cases. Despite these efforts, the consolidated report noted that the entire area within a 7-8 mile radius from the 3's last point had been scanned at least twice using different methods, including direct line search, grid search, aerial drone and helicopter scans, checks of deep washes, hidden canyons, complex boulder fields, and all accessible abandoned mines. On the 9th day, a SAR data analysis team re-examined the group's planned route based on the last photo location, estimating travel potential under weather conditions and minimum water they could carry. Parameters included dehydration rates at 109 degrees Fahrenheit, energy expenditure hiking on rock and sand terrain, and common disorientation patterns for first-time Joshua Tree visitors. Conclusions indicated that if the 3 left Lost Horse Valley around 2:14 p.m. and continued in any direction off marked trails, they could enter disorientation within 45-60 minutes, especially with rapidly rising temperatures and near-zero humidity. In such conditions, the likelihood of collapse from heat exhaustion or heat stroke was rated very high. SAR analysts also noted that many desert heat-related deaths leave no intact remains, especially with strong nighttime winds and high daytime temperatures accelerating decomposition, plus potential wildlife impact. Although no direct evidence indicated the 3 had died, the absence of any survival signs or personal items in the assessed area was unusual but insufficient to suggest criminal elements. On the morning of the 10th day, the SR Coordination Supervisor held a summary meeting with National Park Service representatives, inter-county rescue teams, and several desert safety advisors. Here, teams confirmed no remaining feasible areas within the group's reasonable travel range that hadn't been scanned. Some proposals to expand further north into Wonderland of Rocks were rejected due to terrain assessments showing near-zero likelihood of the group entering there without rock climbing experience. Meanwhile, rescue resources were depleting, and heat-related exhaustion risks were rising. After hours of discussion, the official decision was made: terminate SR operations after 10 continuous days. This decision was communicated to the 3 visitors' families in a private meeting at the Coordination Center. Park Rangers representatives presented the campaign's official conclusion: the 3 were believed to have strayed off trail, suffered severe dehydration, leading to heat stroke or heat exhaustion, and died in an undetermined location within the southern desert area of Lost Horse Valley. Due to complex terrain, strong trace dispersion from winds, and rapid decomposition in high temperatures, remains might be unrecoverable. The families of all 3 strongly opposed this conclusion, pointing out that finding no victim items was abnormal compared to prior heat deaths in the park. They requested consideration of a criminal investigation or at least continued searches in less accessible areas, including deep rock crevices and hard-to-reach abandoned mines. However, upon reviewing all data and lacking any signs of foul play, the National Park Service confirmed no legal basis to transfer the file to criminal investigation. The entire SR campaign documentation, zoned maps, drone images, and individual team reports were closed and archived, with the case classified as cold case, no physical recovery. Families were advised to provide additional information if available, but could not request expanded searches without new evidence. This was the last update to the file before full closure, marking the official transition of the Joshua Tree 3 visitor disappearance to a prolonged silence phase. 5 years after the SAR operation concluded, and the case was officially reclassified as a cold case, the disappearance of Evan Ryder, Melissa Park, and Caleb Monroe had almost completely faded from the media, except for occasional roundup articles about mysterious vanishings in national parks. The families of the 3 hikers maintained contact with the National Park Service, but after so many years without leads, all efforts had settled into passive monitoring. The change began on a late April morning in 2023, when a truck driver traveling on Highway 62 toward Yucca Valley spotted a man wandering close to the roadside, walking unsteadily, shoulders hunched as if shielding himself from the sun, clothes torn and ragged, barefoot and covered in dust. The driver pulled over following safety protocol, concerned the man was in critical condition from heat exhaustion or dehydration, a common issue on this route, cutting through the desert. Upon approaching, he found the man unresponsive to questions, staring only at the ground, body emaciated, skin dry and cracked, lips nearly colorless. Recognizing the abnormal state, the driver called 911. The first responding unit from San Bernardino County arrived on scene and immediately assessed it as a severe case of exhaustion. During the initial check, they discovered the man clutching a crumpled piece of paper so tightly it was difficult to separate at first. Due to concerns about dehydration and cognitive impairment, the response team transported him to Desert Regional Medical Center in Palm Springs for emergency treatment. During transport, the individual provided no name, did not communicate normally, and only repeated scattered, indistinct sounds, leading to his initial classification as a John Doe. At the hospital, when the torn clothing was removed for injury assessment, medical staff discovered multiple signs of prolonged survival. Severe malnutrition, pronounced muscle atrophy, skin darkened from intermittent sun exposure, but with unusual pale patches, and several old scars with shapes atypical for injuries from hiking accidents. As personal effects were collected for standard handover to investigators, the paper he had been clutching was unfolded and confirmed to be a hand-drawn map with numerous symbols, lines, and markings that did not match any tourist maps of Joshua Tree. With no identification, the hospital requested fingerprint matching per mandatory procedure. The results dramatically shifted the entire perspective on the incident. The fingerprints matched perfectly with the biometric records of Evan Ryder, reported missing at Joshua Tree on July 13, 2018. Immediately afterward, a DNA sample was sent for cross-verification through the CODIS database and returned a match. The information was promptly forwarded to the National Park Service and the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, along with a request to fully reevaluate the missing persons file for the 3 hikers. The reappearance of Evan Ryder shattered all initial assumptions from the 2018 SR report, particularly since his condition did not align with any scenario involving heat stroke, fatal dehydration, or self-extraction from the desert. The existence of the hand-drawn map, filled with unusual symbols, further heightened the abnormality of the situation. On the same day the hospital confirmed his identity, the National Park Service sent an urgent report to the U.S. Department of the Interior, recommending activation of a criminal review because Evan's return implied that the other 2, Melissa Park and Caleb Monroe, remained unaccounted for. With one survivor emerging after 5 years missing in a national park and an unexplained map recovered directly from his person, The legal threshold to shift the case from missing due to natural disaster or environmental conditions to federal criminal investigation had been fully met. San Bernardino County recommended FBI involvement due to the potential for elements of abduction, unlawful detention, or organized violence exceeding the investigative scope of county forces or park rangers. Within 48 hours, the FBI Los Angeles field office officially took over the case, requesting a temporary seal on all documents from the 2018 cold case file for re-examination. Simultaneously, a federal investigative team was dispatched to the hospital to assess Evan's condition, verify his ability to provide information, and require preservation of the map as primary evidence. Upon completion of the handover process, the entire missing persons case for the 3 hikers at Joshua Tree was officially reclassified from cold case. No physical recovery to active federal investigation, opening a new phase in a case once believed permanently closed. Immediately after the FBI assumed control of the case and seized the map found in Evan Ryder's hand, the primary piece of evidence was transferred to the dedicated document analysis lab at the Los Angeles field office for initial forensic examination. The goals of the analysis were to determine the age of the paper, the type of writing instrument used, storage conditions, degree of natural degradation, and any indicators that might reveal where the map was created. Forensic experts began by examining the paper under a microscope to identify cellulose composition and fiber structure. Results showed degradation and fiber separation characteristic of paper produced in common lines before 2015, differing from modern notebook or office paper. Surface chemical analysis revealed moderate lignin breakdown, suggesting fluctuating but not prolonged moisture exposure, an indication the sheet had not been soaked or left outdoors, but likely existed in a confined environment, possibly an underground chamber or poorly ventilated enclosure. This aligned with the paper's crumpled state yet lack of water, staining or fibrous mold, ruling out direct burial or exposure in a desert tent. Next, ink specialists conducted Raman spectroscopy to identify the composition of the markings. Results indicated the lines were created with soft graphite, not ink or ballpoint pen. Pressure on the paper was uneven. Some graphite marks were dark and deeply embedded, others barely touching the surface, producing shaky lines. These variations suggested the drawer was in an unstable state, possibly trembling due to environmental factors or physical exhaustion. No evidence of mechanical pencils or high-quality graphite was found. Instead, the graphite degradation pointed to raw graphite, likely from a cheap pencil or even an uncoated fragment. The absence of any other inks confirmed it was a fully hand-drawn map with no pre-printed symbols. The symbols on the map were categorized into 3 groups: contour-like terrain lines, small triangle or square symbols, and dashed lines indicating movement paths. The triangle symbols particularly drew expert attention because they did not match standard National Park Service trail signage. After comparison with historical mining maps archived by the U.S. Geological Survey, experts noted that the triangles resembled 90% the symbols used for mineshaft entrances in maps from the 1930s to 1950s, employed in small-scale gold mines scattered around what is now the Joshua Tree boundary. Identifying features included upright triangles with apex pointing up, slightly curved bottom edge rather than straight, and consistently repeated size. This suggested the drawer either referenced or remembered old mine map structures or had seen such symbols before recreating them. Following symbol identification, the analysis team measured relative distances between triangles, dashed lines, and terrain features. Results showed the map lacked perfect scale accuracy, but maintained internal consistency. Triangle-marked points formed a linked axis corresponding to known geological orientations of former mining areas. When cross-referenced with public geological records, the distances between triangle positions matched average spacing of small shafts in pre-Memoris, World War II manual mining systems. This reinforced the likelihood that the map was not a confused fabrication from memory, but one created based on direct observation of underground structures. A further analysis focused on short, segmented straight markers. These did not resemble standard trails or paths. Instead, they resembled ventilation shafts or connecting tunnels in old mines. Notably, in the map's center, a bolder curved line connected two triangles with uneven dashed segments. When compared to documented mine structures in the Mojave and Colorado desert regions, experts determined this line likely represented an abandoned or partially collapsed subsidiary tunnel. Analysis of line intensity showed the drawer applied greatest pressure at intersections between triangle symbols, suggesting particular importance or strong memory of those locations. This supported the view that the map was purposeful rather than random. Upon completion of unified analysis, forensic experts provided a consolidated assessment, paper material consistent with 4 to 6 year age, graphite indicating unstable drawing conditions, triangle symbols compatible with historical mine notation, marker spacing matching manual mine structures, dashed lines potentially representing underground tunnel routes. The conclusion was that the map had clear intent, was not random or meaningless, and most likely related directly to an old mine system on the Joshua Tree periphery, where small-scale mining once occurred before federal land incorporation. After completing forensic analysis of the hand-drawn map and determining its symbols likely corresponded to an old mine system on the edge of Joshua Tree, the FBI moved to the phase of overlaying the map against real-world terrain using spatial analysis methods. First, the map was digitized with a high-resolution scanner, then imported into a GIS system for data layering, marking triangle symbols and dashed lines as hypothetical points on the digital map. The GIS team began by determining the map's primary orientation through analysis of extended lines and intersection angles, thus establishing the assumed north used by the drawer. Since the map lacked a compass or directional indicator, experts relied on familiar patterns from old mine maps and assumed the drawer replicated real geological orientations. Once relative orientation was established, the hand-drawn map was overlaid onto digital topographic maps of Joshua Tree by distorting scale to fit known geological features. This process took many hours, requiring testing multiple parameter sets to find the best deformation match between the hand-drawn and real-world maps. Meanwhile, another team utilized LiDAR data for the Mojave region and Joshua Tree boundary provided by the U.S. Geological Survey. LiDAR, capable of penetrating sparse vegetation and revealing detailed surface elevation, allowed detection of unusual depressions or fractures potentially representing old shaft axes. Experts filtered out natural granite fissures and focused on linear, straight, or slightly curved depressions characteristic of collapsed tunnels over time. When the GIS data from the hand-drawn map was overlaid on the LiDAR layer, a 40–45% match emerged in relative spacing between triangle symbols. Though not conclusive, this was sufficient to prioritize the area as highly suspicious. The matching region lay near Gold Crown Road, a narrow dirt track extending through the Desert Queen mine area and connecting to the Old Dale mining district, site of numerous small-scale gold operations during the 1930s–1950s. For further clarification, the Historical Mining Analysis Team retrieved USGS documents and abandoned mine maps for the area, including lists of filled shafts, collapsed subsidiary tunnels, and systems with incomplete modern records due to cessation before Joshua Tree became a national park. When overlaying old mine maps with the LiDAR match zone, 3 compatible points appeared, locations of 3 small shafts, noted on a 1942 map, but absent from current NPS maps. These were recorded as shallow prospect shafts, manually dug 20–40 feet deep, often abandoned shortly after. Notably, a 1951 USGS note mentioned one of the 3 shafts near Gold Crown Road had been partially filled due to subsidence risk, without precise coordinates. This aligned with the hand-drawn map's clustered triangle symbols, suggesting entrances altered over time. To narrow the area, the GIS team analyzed relative distances between hand-drawn symbols and compared them to the 3 identified USGS shafts. Parameters for connecting line lengths, orientation angles, and marker spacing were entered into a spatial model, yielding a narrow terrain strip approximately 1,200 meters southeast from Gold Crown Road. This was deemed the highest probability zone containing the entrance described by the map. Recognizing the strong match, the FBI requested higher resolution LiDAR data, including recent survey flights by the Department of the Interior. When overlaying the new data on mining maps, a notable anomaly appeared: an oval depression about 6-7 meters long, with soft uniform edges, offset roughly 800 feet from the old Gold Crown Road alignment. The depression's regularity ruled out natural formation. It closely resembled a subsidence pit from a filled or collapsed shaft. Combining older NPS drone imagery revealed a patch of differently colored soil at the exact anomaly location, suggesting disturbance several years prior. Before deciding on ground survey, the analysis team reviewed weather data, wind patterns, and annual erosion rates to confirm the anomaly was not a natural feature from wind or seasonal runoff. After excluding all natural factors, the anomaly was confirmed as likely resulting from prior human intervention. In the final joint meeting among the FBI, GIS team, USGS representatives, and National Park Service, all experts agreed the anomaly area near Gold Crown Road warranted direct field investigation. Identifying a high-probability suspect zone matching the hand-drawn map prompted the FBI to immediately shift to the field phase, preparing to deploy technical teams to examine subsurface structures and verify whether the location contained an old mine consistent with the map symbols. After determining that the anomaly near Gold Crown Road was the most suspicious location matching the hand-drawn map, the FBI deployed the tactical rescue team, along with technicians specialized in underground spaces, to access the site. By early morning on the survey day, the area was cordoned off with a wide radius to prevent interference from tourists or local residents, while preserving the integrity of the scene. The HRT approached in a two-layer formation, the first layer tasked with checking for surface collapse risks, and the second layer carrying specialized breaching equipment to open an entry if an underground bunker was confirmed. While surveying the anomaly area, they discovered a layer of compacted soil covered with rock debris, clear signs of an artificially sealed entrance buried several years earlier. Geological technicians measured subsurface voids using handheld seismic devices and confirmed a continuous hollow space extending several meters below, consistent with a partially filled bunker structure. Determining the area stable enough to proceed with entry, the HRT began clearing the surface soil and rock layer, using engineering shovels and pry bars instead of mechanical equipment to avoid damaging the underlying structure or risking any sealed airspace. After more than an hour of removing the covering layer, an old, heavily oxidized metal plate gradually emerged. Inspection revealed it was a homemade hatch, manually welded from thin steel sheets and secured with two rotted wooden crossbars. There were no proper hinges. Instead, the steel plate was wedged with rocks from the outside to hold it in place, indicating that the bunker's users did not want others to be able to open the door from the exterior. The HRT used hydraulic shears to break the weakened weld points, creating enough clearance to attach manual lifting gear, thereby raising the steel plate without generating strong vibrations. As the entry was partially opened, a rush of cold air emerged from below, carrying the smell of damp earth mixed with old metal and the characteristics of a long-sealed space. The temperature difference from the outside desert environment confirmed that the bunker was deep underground and minimally affected by external conditions. The technical team lowered a borescope camera into the opening for initial inspection. The footage showed a vertical shaft approximately 20 feet deep, with walls reinforced by old timber, many pieces showing signs of deterioration. At the bottom of the shaft was a flat earthen floor leading to a small chamber, from which a horizontal tunnel extended further. When assessing collapse risks, experts confirmed that personnel could be lowered if secured with safety lines and strong vibrations were avoided. After installing temporary lighting and ensuring no toxic gas buildup inside, the HRT lowered one member first to verify safety. Upon reaching the bottom, the member confirmed that the initial chamber measured about 3 x 4 meters, with height sufficient to stand upright, and earthen walls reinforced with mismatched wooden planks. A thick layer of fine dust covered all surfaces, indicating the space had not been accessed for a long time. As the search extended into the connecting horizontal tunnel, the HRT discovered that the space beyond differed completely from traditional mining tunnel structures. A few meters from the landing point, the tunnel gradually transitioned into an area showing signs of use for living or confinement purposes. Technicians noted 2 rows of nails and iron hooks hand-driven into the earthen walls, positioned at knee and wrist height for an adult. Not far away, sections of wall showed unusual wear patterns, indicating that objects or human bodies had been secured there for extended periods. When fully illuminating the chamber, they observed that the earthen floor had been manually leveled, unlike the natural uneven surfaces of old tunnels, proving this area had been modified for long-term use. In the corner of the first confinement chamber, the HRT found a single-bed structure made from old wooden pallets, propped up with 2 large rocks. Beneath the floor was an area of heavily compacted and slightly depressed soil, indicating something heavy had rested there for a prolonged time. Next to the bed were rotted synthetic fiber ropes, still retaining their structure, along with 2 small rusted metal shackles bolted to the wall with medium-sized bolts. In the next chamber, a few meters away, the team discovered another similar pallet bed, with shackles positioned closer to the floor, apparently intended to restrict movement more severely. Both chambers showed vertical scraping marks on the walls, possibly from repeated movements by confined individuals in the tight space. Regarding fixed fixtures, the survey team found a metal pipe running upward, likely a rudimentary ventilation system. Additionally, a section of wall had light black scorch marks, suggesting the use of improvised lighting such as candles or oil lamps. The overall layout indicated intentional, long-term design for human confinement rather than ordinary mining. This data was recorded with specialized cameras and transmitted to the command center for further evaluation, confirming that the bunker under the anomaly near Gold Crown Road was a space used for a considerable period, with clear evidence of past illegal detention activities. Immediately after the HRT determined that the bunker structure showed signs of long-term confinement and discovered manually modified detention chambers, the FBI deployed a specialized forensic team into the bunker to conduct evidence-level crime scene processing. The technicians wore full protective suits, used air-filtering masks, portable lighting, and environmental monitoring equipment to assess underground conditions before touching any objects. During the sweep of the area beyond the horizontal tunnel leading from the first detention chamber, one forensic team member spotted an unusual structure in the dark corner of the second chamber. A cluster of bones lying against the wall, surrounded by thick dust and soil mixed with decomposed organic fragments. Upon closer illumination, they identified it as a nearly intact human skeleton for most of the bone structure, with complete soft tissue decomposition due to prolonged time in the sealed environment. The remains were in a side-lying position, one arm pulled behind the back, with the wrist still attached to a rusted metal ring, connected by a short chain to a wall bolt. This position matched the previously noted hooks and shackles. The forensic team immediately isolated the scene in this chamber, marking the relative positions of all bones using an internal bunker coordinate system and taking 360-degree photographs for later analysis. Shortly afterward, another team examined the third detention chamber, the deepest in the sequence of modified spaces, and discovered a second set of remains lying against the opposite corner, with detached rib bones, a skull showing a longitudinal crack, and the right arm bone displaced nearly 1 meter from the main body, indicating post-mortem movement or decomposition in the sealed environment. This second skeleton also had shackles on the left ankle, with only small segments of rotted synthetic rope remaining attached to the metal hooks. The forensic team preliminarily assessed that both skeletons belonged to adults and had been deceased for many years, consistent with complete soft tissue decomposition. With the 2 body locations identified, the specialists shifted to collecting scene data First, they measured air humidity in the bunker to determine decomposition conditions. Readings showed humidity fluctuating between 42–56%, much higher than the desert surface above, due to the sealed space retaining moisture from the soil and accumulated respiration during use. The rudimentary ventilation system connected via the metal pipe to the surface still allowed weak one-way airflow, creating a slow but stable decomposition environment. This explained why most bones remained intact without separation by wildlife or strong external disturbance. To establish correlations between body positions and bunker structure, the forensic team measured floor tilt angles, subsidence in body areas, and compaction of surrounding dust layers. These measurements helped determine if bodies had been moved or if confined individuals changed position before death. For the skeleton in the second chamber, the flat floor and undisturbed fine dust showed no signs of disturbance, indicating the body had remained in that exact position for a long time without interference. In contrast, in the third chamber, the dust behind the skeleton had narrow, deep grooves running along the wall, possibly drag marks from the body or from the confined person rubbing against the wall before death. These traces were captured with high-resolution photographs and 3D scanned using handheld LiDAR for digital scene replication. When collecting bone samples, the forensic team followed strict protocols. Each bone fragment was numbered, its exact position recorded on the grid coordinate, then placed in individual sample containers. Fractures on ribs and arm bones were preserved intact for cause of injury analysis. Bone sections showing friction from shackles were flagged for restraint duration evaluation. During sampling, the team also recovered remaining synthetic fiber strands from the floor, rusted bolt metal fragments, and wood splinters from the pallet beds. These items were sealed in packages labeled potential restraint evidence for transfer to fiber and metal analysis labs. Bunker environmental conditions were documented in detail: stable temperature of 68–72 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of external heat. Very weak airflow from the ventilation pipe, higher than average desert humidity, and no signs of standing water or erosion. These factors confirmed the bunker's structural stability and long-term use without significant deformation. After completing evidence collection and full data recording, the scene was sealed under federal crime protocols. Entry points were equipped with alarms and placed under absolute control to prevent interference or disturbance during subsequent analysis. All evidence from bone samples, shackles, fiber fragments, to soil dust, and 3D scans was packed in biosecure containers and immediately transferred to the FBI Forensic Lab for advanced testing. The discovery of 2 skeletons in separate detention chambers established that the bunker under the anomaly near Gold Crown Road was not only manually modified space, but also the scene of 2 prolonged deaths under confinement, elevating the entire case far beyond an ordinary missing persons incident. After the 2 skeletons were collected from the detention chambers in the bunker and transferred to the FBI Forensic Laboratory, the process of identification and cause of death analysis was immediately initiated under federal investigation protocols. The first step was to separate representative bone samples, including femur, ribs, jaw, and intact teeth, for DNA analysis. Specialists selected the least degraded sections to optimize genetic material recovery. For each skeleton, bone powder was obtained using specialized drills in a clean room. Then DNA was extracted via demineralization and thermal methods. Despite decomposition exceeding 4 years, the lab successfully recovered sufficient DNA for comparison with records stored from the 2018 missing persons case. Results returned after several days confirmed that the skeleton in the second chamber was Melissa Park, and the deeper skeleton in the third chamber was Caleb Monroe, both matching completely with DNA indices previously collected from relatives shortly after the disappearance was reported. There were no errors or mixed nucleotides, definitively establishing victim identities. Following identification, experts proceeded to analyze bone trauma to assess causes of death. For Melissa Park's remains, ribs 3 through 7 on the right side showed multiple spiral fractures, indicating twisting force or strong unilateral impact. The skull had no major cracks, but the jaw showed impact signs, and the right forearm had a transverse fracture, common in defensive arm-raising injuries. Melissa's wrist retained clear indentations where rusted shackles remained attached to the second chamber wall, proving prolonged restraint before death. Additionally, the tibia had incomplete cracks from repeated impacts. Combining these signs, forensics concluded the victim endured multiple direct blunt force traumas, possibly from hard objects or being slammed against surfaces, with death most likely from chest injuries causing respiratory failure. For Caleb Monroe's remains, bone trauma was even more severe. The skull had an approximately 8 centimeters longitudinal crack from the forehead to the left temporal area, indicating direct heavy impact. The lower jaw was fractured at 2 points, the right arm bone detached from its anatomical position, and several left ribs showed compression fractures from behind. The left foot displayed deep gouging from prolonged tight shackles on the ankle. No knife or sharp object marks were present, indicating injuries from blunt force or direct violence. Bone structure analysis also suggested Caleb likely suffered exhaustion before death, reduced bone density compared to average, implying prolonged malnutrition. After completing trauma analysis, forensics estimated time of death for each victim based on decomposition degree, bone condition, dust sediment thickness, and microbial samples from bunker soil. The sealed bunker environment with stable humidity and weak ventilation slowed decomposition compared to the desert surface, allowing relatively accurate estimates. Results showed Melissa Park died approximately 4 years before discovery, falling between fall 2018 and early 2019. Caleb Monroe died nearly 1 year after Melissa. Decomposition degree and presence of certain soil fungi, characteristic of secondary decomposition stages, indicated his death around late 2019 or early 2020. The staggered death times aligned with the separate chamber arrangements and evidence of prolonged bunker use. Integrating all data from shackle marks, violent bone fractures, body positions, decomposition levels, and estimated death times, the forensic experts reached a unified conclusion that both victims died by homicide. Notably, no evidence supported accidental death in the bunker or self-inflicted injuries. The clear traumas showed repeated external force applications at different times. Moreover, shackle marks and restrained body positions completely ruled out self-harm. Official causes of death were recorded as chest trauma from direct blunt force under confinement for Melissa, and cranial trauma combined with exhaustion under prolonged captivity for Caleb. These conclusions provided sufficient legal basis to classify the case as federal homicide. Accordingly, the 2018 missing persons file was removed from cold case status and transferred to federal homicide investigation, expanding FBI investigative authority and enabling further evidence collection under special provisions for serious violent crimes. Thus, from a disappearance initially attributed to natural conditions, the forensic examination fully established criminal nature, transforming the investigation from a closed file into a planned and large-scale murder case. After the forensic lab confirmed the identities of the 2 victims and determined that these were 2 homicides occurring under conditions of prolonged captivity, the FBI moved into the phase of building a suspect profile to identify an individual with the capability to access, operate, and maintain an underground bunker system as discovered. The first step was to conduct criminal geographic profiling based on the bunker's location, the structure of the access routes, distance to major roadways, and the suspect's likely mobility. Experts mapped a radius around Gold Crown Road, identifying the viable area where the suspect could reside or habitually operate. Analytical models indicated that an individual maintaining a bunker over an extended period typically lives within a 15-mile range of the site to optimize nighttime access and avoid drawing attention. The focal area centered on routes connecting from Highway 62 to Desert Hot Springs, a region known for many reclusive residents or those living on scattered parcels. Next, the FBI reviewed the full list of individuals living in this area, particularly those with a history of accessing abandoned mines, recorded violations related to public property, or unusual movement near Gold Crown Road after 2018. Records cross-referenced with National Park Service data revealed several individuals who had been warned for entering old mine areas, among which one name appeared multiple times: Harland Greer, 48 years old, residing in Desert Hot Springs. Greer had been cited by park rangers 3 times between 2012 and 2017 for accessing abandoned mines along the eastern edge of Joshua Tree, including one incident directly near the Gold Crown Road area. Records showed Greer failed to pay fines and often displayed confrontational behavior when approached by authorities, though he was never prosecuted due to lack of criminal grounds. The FBI continued analyzing Greer's daily patterns through utility data for electricity and water, as well as financial activity, revealing that Greer lived almost in complete isolation, with virtually no social interactions and outings, only at irregular hours, mostly after 10 p.m. Despite having no stable employment record, Greer had a history of purchasing miscellaneous items for manual repairs, including rope, bolts, wooden pallets, and small metal tools. County traffic camera data showed Greer's vehicle appearing multiple times on routes leading to Gold Crown Road between 2018 and 2020, coinciding with the estimated period when the 2 victims were held and died. Upon closer analysis of movement patterns, the FBI noted that Greer routinely used back roads, avoided traffic cameras, and never drove too close to main trailheads, a deliberate evasion behavior. Greer's cell phone data was virtually non-existent due to his use of an old model without GPS, further complicating tracking. However, the absence of mobile signals also aligned with the profile of a reclusive individual, avoiding modern surveillance systems. With this data, the FBI forwarded Greer's profile to the Behavioral Analysis Unit for evaluation of his fit as an offender capable of long-term underground captivity. The BO assessed based on factors: planning ability, terrain knowledge, social isolation, anti-authority attitude, and organizational level in behavior. They concluded that constructing and maintaining a captivity bunker as discovered required basic structural knowledge of mines, skills in working with wood and metal, as well as patience and discipline to sustain a controlled environment over time. These traits matched Greer, who grew up in a family with a tradition of small-scale manual mining and had years of experience repairing self-built structures. The BO also examined Greer's personality and social behavior through neighbor interviews and prior contacts. All accounts described Greer as quiet, non-communicative, avoiding direct eye contact, and often making those around him feel uneasy. He rarely left home during the day and had a habit of walking around the rocky hills behind his property late at night. BO experts concluded that Greer exhibited characteristics of an organized offender, evidenced by minimizing traces at the scene, controlling victims in enclosed spaces, and maintaining travel routines without attracting attention. The combination of geographic profiling, NPS data, movement patterns, and behavioral analysis painted a relatively clear picture. Greer was highly likely the individual who accessed, operated, and used the captivity bunker where the bodies of Melissa Park and Caleb Monroe were found. Once all data was compiled, the FBI placed Greer on the priority suspect list as the only person with a history of mine access, reclusive behavior, movement patterns matching the death timelines, and the highest behavioral profile fit. After Harland Greer was placed on the priority suspect list, the FBI initiated the surveillance and monitoring phase to gather independent evidence before proceeding to arrest. First, a surveillance team was deployed around Greer's residence in Desert Hot Springs, using passive tracking combined with hidden cameras positioned to observe entry and exit points without drawing attention. Greer lived on an isolated parcel with a makeshift wood and metal house and no nearby neighbors, requiring surveillance from a distance with observation points disguised as maintenance vehicles or civilian ones. Over several days of monitoring, the team noted Greer had almost no interactions with others, only leaving the house at night, sometimes pushing a small cart containing items that cameras could not clearly capture. The routes Greer frequently took further reinforced suspicions. He used dirt roads avoiding traffic cameras, especially side paths heading east from Highway 62, not far from the Gold Crown Road area. To strengthen grounds for a search warrant, the FBI sent a trash collection team to examine Greer's curbside garbage during times it was placed out for public pickup, a legal evidence collection method. In 2 collections a week apart, the team recovered suspicious items, hand-cut wood pieces similar to pallets found in the bunker, worn synthetic fiber rope segments, and a scrap of paper with scribbled drawings resembling a T-shaped structure similar to the bunker's preliminary layout. These items were sent to analysis, where comparisons showed the rope had polymer composition matching samples recovered from the bunker, and the worn pallet wood had saw marks consistent with cheap handheld tools likely owned by Greer. Continuing expanded surveillance, the FBI began monitoring Greer's purchases. A hardware store camera in Yucca Valley captured Greer buying nails, bolts, replacement saw blades, and small metal fittings, items matching the rusted bolts and homemade devices found in the bunker. Store reports indicated Greer purchased similar items multiple times between 2018-2020, aligning with the victim's death period. From this, the FBI escalated monitoring, deploying an electronic technical team using signal detection equipment to assess if Greer had installed homemade cameras around his property. Results detected a low-frequency signal consistent with cheap DIY cameras, indicating Greer's tendency to monitor his surroundings. A typical sign of an isolated, wary individual. Once sufficient circumstantial evidence was accumulated for a search warrant, the FBI submitted documents to federal court outlining Greer's links to the bunker area, mine access history, reclusive behavior, movement patterns, items from trash, and matches between home evidence and bunker evidence. The search warrant was signed early the following week. Immediately, the FBI deployed a tactical entry team coordinated with HRT to execute the search of Greer's home at dawn for safety and to prevent suspect resistance. Upon approach, Greer was inside the house, with no visible weapons, but was handled under high-risk suspect protocols. During the search, investigators quickly discovered multiple items matching the bunker scene: unused shackles, new synthetic rope of the same type as the rotted rope in the cells, rough self-assembled wooden pallets, and a box of metal bolts similar to those found underground. Notably, in a small back room, the search team recovered a notebook with multiple pages of rough sketches depicting tunnels, vertical shafts, and connectors. One drawing nearly exactly matched the bunker's layout, where Melissa and Caleb's bodies were found, including a triangle symbol at the exact shaft location and 2 squares representing the cells. This was considered the most critical evidence, showing Greer not only knew about mines, but directly sketched a structure matching the crime scene. Additionally, homemade devices including battery-powered cameras, improvised wiring, manual switches, and a hollow metal pipe similar to the bunker's ventilation system were seized. Cross-checking serials and components, the FBI found devices in Greer's home were assembled from the same materials as those in the bunker, reinforcing that they were made by the same person. After the search concluded and all evidence was sealed for forensic examination, the arrest warrant for Harlan Greer was executed on-site under federal authority for charges related to captivity, causing death, and serious federal violence violations. Greer was handcuffed and transported without resistance, but provided no cooperative statements during the arrest process. The collection of evidence and suspect arrest was a crucial step, directly linking Greer to the captivity bunker while completing the surveillance phase and transitioning the case to the next stage in the federal investigation process. After Harlan Greer was arrested and evidence from his home strengthened the hypothesis of prolonged underground captivity, the FBI shifted to the critical phase, recording detailed statements from Evan Ryder to reconstruct the abduction sequence and establish an accurate timeline of the 5 years of imprisonment. Since Evan had endured prolonged physical and psychological depletion, all interviews were supervised by trauma psychology experts, and the FBI applied protocols for long-term captivity witnesses to avoid further harm. In the first week after his health stabilized, the FBI only asked him to recount basic details to establish the event sequence before the group's disappearance. Evan stated the group left Lost Horse Valley in early afternoon and accidentally turned onto an unmarked path. At a point among large boulders, they heard noise behind them and were attacked upon turning. Evan did not recall exact steps due to being dazed from a blow to the back of the head, but he remembered being dragged across sand and having his hands bound with a belt or similar material. The second interview focused on the period right after Evan regained consciousness in darkness. He said upon opening his eyes, he found himself in a narrow space with rough dirt walls and a damp smell, not the open desert air. Evan described the first cell he was held in as just large enough for one person to lie down, with a wooden pallet raised a few inches off the ground. His wrists were bound with synthetic rope and secured to the wall with shackles. The FBI cross-checked this statement with the actual bunker structure and found near-perfect matches. In the third interview, Evan began describing the phase when Greer separated the three into different cells. He said after waking a few hours later, he heard Melissa weakly calling his name from a nearby cell. Caleb called from farther away, indicating he was in the deepest cell. Evan described Greer appearing only a few times daily, bringing minimal water and food. He spoke little, only gesturing or using light to demand silence. Evan's statement outlined the early captivity phase. All three were in shock, attempting to communicate through dirt walls, but Greer quickly stopped this with loud noises and tightening shackles if they made sound. In the fourth interview, Evan provided more details on the separation process. He described that after a few days, Melissa began weakening from dehydration and panic, while Caleb coughed constantly. Evan pleaded multiple times but to no avail. Greer reduced water deliveries to a minimum when any tried to escape bonds, punishing the group collectively. These descriptions matched wall traces in the bunker, long scratches and indented areas from impacts. In the next phase of statements, the FBI focused on establishing timelines based on signals Evan remembered. Temperature changes, wind sounds through ventilation pipes at night, intervals between Greer's visits, and surface sounds like distant vehicles or desert noises. From this, experts built a framework for major phases. Evan recalled Melissa dying first after a few months, based on no longer hearing her calls and a change in bunker atmosphere as Greer stopped bringing food in that direction. This aligned with forensic estimates placing Melissa's death in late 2018 or early 2019. Caleb, per Evan, lasted longer but declined rapidly from dehydration and injury. Evan remembered Caleb sustaining a head injury after Greer became angry, though details were unclear as he only heard impacts and groans. A few months later, Caleb stopped responding to Evan's calls. This matched forensic estimates around late 2019 or early 2020. In the sixth and seventh interviews, the FBI focused on remaining timelines. Evan described the 5 years in the bunker as not continuous or clear like normal time. He relied on faint light cycles through ventilation and surface sounds to gauge passage. Supporting psychologists helped analyze statements, combining remembered details, like unusual cold spells in winter, extreme heat days warming the dirt, or Greer bringing extra water after rain, to assemble a general 5-year timeline. From all statements, the FBI reconstructed the captivity timeline in 3 phases: initial, abduction and cell separation; middle, deaths of Melissa then Caleb; and final, Evan held alone, with Greer visiting less, leaving him to survive in minimal conditions. Cross-referencing statements with scene data, forensics, and environmental analysis allowed the FBI to confirm this timeline fit the discovered prolonged bunker captivity context, while establishing Evan Ryder as the sole source capable of reconstructing the full sequence of events during the group's 5 missing years. After establishing the detention timeline based on Evan Ryder's testimony and cross-referencing it with the underground tunnel crime scene, the FBI shifted to a detailed analysis of Harland Greer's modus operandi to determine how he approached, selected targets, subdued, and transported the 3 victims into the underground tunnel system. The initial phase of the analysis focused on how Greer initially selected targets. Based on information from the NPS and collected data, the FBI determined that Greer did not attack on main trails with heavy foot traffic. Instead, he targeted small groups that strayed from marked paths, particularly tourists unfamiliar with the desert who tended to be curious about side trails. This aligned with the behavior of Evan, Melissa, and Caleb on the day they disappeared when they turned onto an unmarked path near Lost Horse Valley. Analysis of cameras from other trailheads in the park showed Greer had appeared around Hidden Valley and Queen Valley in previous years, but he rarely ventured deep into the trails, instead observing from a distance in areas with large boulders for cover. The BO concluded that Greer likely monitored hikers' habits through indirect observation, identifying moments when small groups became separated from the crowd or stopped in areas with poor visibility. He did not target families or large groups, but preferred groups of 3 or fewer, especially young groups without much navigation equipment. This allowed Greer to subdue them quickly in a short time without risk of detection. The second phase of the MO involved the method of tracking victims. During the search of Greer's residence, the FBI found homemade camera devices with simple lenses, crude wiring, detachable batteries, and thin metal casings similar to those used for wildlife trail cameras. This led the investigative team to hypothesize that Greer used homemade cameras placed at access points to side trails or near boulder fields to monitor hikers' movements. Although no operational cameras were found, the structure of the devices in Greer's home exactly matched the component fragments found near the tunnel entrance, reinforcing the likelihood that he had a simple but effective monitoring network around his area of operation. In addition to cameras, the FBI considered the possibility that Greer used lures. Evan's testimony indicated the group followed a direction that seemed logical, but was not the main trail. This raised suspicion among analysts that Greer stacked small rocks or made very subtle markings to make hikers think they were on a legitimate side trail. These markers would easily disappear due to wind or shifting sand, but for someone as familiar with the terrain and who often moved at night like Greer, resetting them was not difficult. The next step in Greer's modus operandi was the method of subduing victims. Based on Evan's testimony and marks on the victims' bones, the FBI believed Greer used a stun gun or similar shocking device. This explained why Evan had no clear memory of the moment of attack, only recalling a sensation of shock and falling. A stun gun was also an ideal tool for Greer because it produced no loud noise, allowing him to maintain secrecy in remote areas. Additionally, Greer used zip ties to initially bind victims' hands before securing them with shackles in the tunnel. Zip ties had the advantages of being lightweight, easy to carry, and difficult to remove without tools. The use of zip ties was confirmed by fragments of synthetic cord found near the initial holding chamber, as well as ligature marks on Evan's wrists from binding before he was secured with wall-mounted shackles. Once the 3 victims were subdued, Greer moved to the most challenging step in his MO, transporting them into the underground tunnel. Terrain analysis showed the distance between the disappearance site and the tunnel entrance was over a mile, but the route could follow rock ridges and dry washes, completely avoiding sightlines from main trails. According to Evan, he felt himself being dragged for a distance before being placed on something like a wheelbarrow or a wooden board, which matched surveillance records showing Greer had a small wheelbarrow he often used at night. With the combination of a stun gun and zip ties, Greer could transport victims one at a time or in stages, ensuring minimal noise. The tunnel, being buried under a layer of soil and covered by an old metal plate, made the location virtually undetectable from the surface, allowing Greer discreet access. When lowering victims into the tunnel, Greer used a vertical shaft about 20 feet deep as a natural barrier, preventing victims from climbing out. Wooden pallets placed in the tunnel indicated he used them to cushion the drop when lowering victims or as leverage to move them into the holding cells. The FBI concluded Greer had prepared the tunnel over many years, reinforcing the earthen walls with old wood, adding bolts and shackles to create a long-term detention structure. Thus, Greer's modus operandi demonstrated a combination of observing hiker behavior, homemade equipment, rapid attack with a stun gun, binding with zip ties, and discreet transport via evasive routes, ultimately placing victims in a meticulously prepared tunnel system that allowed him to maintain control over extended periods without detection. After determining Harlan Greer's modus operandi, the FBI moved to analyzing the entire detention mechanism in the tunnel to understand how the system operated over many years and assess the psychological impact on the victims. Reconstructing the captivity mechanism relied on combining the physical structure of the tunnel, evidence collected at the scene, detailed testimony from Evan Ryder, and expert analysis from the forensic environment team. First was the cell structure. All 3 discovered cells were small, with width barely enough for an adult to lie down or sit with knees drawn up, creating severe movement restriction and prolonged muscle strain. Melissa's and Caleb's cells were deeper and completely separated by thick earthen walls, indicating Greer's intent to limit communication between victims. The earthen walls were reinforced with old wooden beams, many showing dents from heavy impacts, consistent with Evan's testimony about victims rubbing against walls while trying to move or when being yanked. The cell floors were unnaturally flat, unlike the natural uneven terrain, showing Greer used manual tools to level them, creating a controllable surface difficult to dig through. Wooden pallets were placed in 2 cells as crude beds, showing wear in areas corresponding to body weight over many years. This matched Evan's condition when found, severe muscle atrophy reflecting prolonged immobility in one position. Another key element in the detention mechanism was the light cycle. Evan's testimony indicated he only perceived time through very dim light filtering through the ventilation pipe. On-site light measurements showed daytime illumination in the tunnel did not exceed 2-3 lux, equivalent to deep shade, with no direct sunlight. At night, the tunnel was completely dark with no light sources except when Greer brought his personal flashlight. This irregular light-dark cycle disrupted victims' circadian rhythms, leading to loss of time perception, insomnia, and cognitive decline, consistent with Evan's initial psychological evaluation upon rescue. Additionally, tunnel temperature remained stable at 68-72 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, much lower than the extreme desert temperatures outside. This level made it difficult for victims to retain body heat with minimal rations while contributing to persistent fatigue. Analysis of dust and soil samples from the cell areas showed Greer controlled rations extremely restrictively. Organic samples from the tunnel floor showed traces of dry bread, canned meat, and filtered water in plastic bottles, matching the types of food and containers found in Greer's trash. Evan stated Greer provided food only once or twice a day, sometimes skipping for hours or an entire day, reflecting an intent to create absolute dependence on the perpetrator. Water supply was also tightly controlled, insufficient for minimal needs, explaining why both Melissa and Caleb became severely debilitated before death. Forensic experts concluded this rationing regime was designed to keep victims in a state of exhaustion and reduced resistance without immediate death, allowing Greer long-term control. Another element demonstrating Greer's control method was the shackle arrangement. Both sets of remains showed binding marks on wrists or ankles, abnormal bone indentations consistent with years of restraint. Shackles bolted to walls allowed Greer to control movement. Victims could sit or lie, but not stand fully or reach the exit. Evan confirmed Greer often tightened shackles more as punishment or to suppress noise. This matched friction marks on tunnel walls, with deep grooves from wrists or ankles pulled taut during resistance or overtime. Forensic correspondence, cross-referencing Evan's testimony with physical evidence, showed significant matches. Evan described the ventilation system using small metal pipes, and indeed, the forensic team found metal pipes leading to the surface with soot and wear around the edges. Evan also described periods when Greer visited more during rain or cold weather, corresponding to thicker mud deposits near the tunnel entrance, indicating Greer moved more frequently in favorable weather. Additionally, Evan described smells of oil or metal during some of Greer's visits, and evidence analysis confirmed industrial grease traces on some bolts and water cups, suggesting Greer performed maintenance before or after entering the tunnel. Assessing long-term impact on victims, the federal psychological team determined all three experienced varying degrees of malnutrition, sleep deprivation, time disorientation, and prolonged psychological stress. Melissa and Caleb suffered severe debilitation leading to death, while Evan survived due to greater resilience or more frequent water and food from Greer in the final phase. Evan's panic, light avoidance, muscle atrophy, and cognitive decline all aligned with years of confinement in an enclosed, light-deprived environment under total perpetrator control. Through the entire analysis, the FBI determined Greer's detention mechanism relied on three core elements: movement restriction via shackles, disruption of time perception through irregular light cycles, and physical weakening via minimal rations. These elements combined enabled Greer to maintain absolute control over many years without detection from the outside world. After completing the analysis of the detention mechanism and psychological impact, the FBI entered a critical phase, integrating all evidence from multiple sources to reconstruct a continuous chain of events, spanning from the disappearance of the three hikers in 2018 to Evan Ryder's discovery in 2023. This process required combining the hand-drawn map, underground crime scene, forensic analysis, Evan's testimony, and all evidence seized from Harlan Greer's home to create a unified timeline for the entire case. First, the analysis team started with the hand-drawn map obtained from Evan, based on forensic cartography results confirming the map was intentional, using old mining symbols and accurately describing the tunnel system location near Gold Crown Road. The FBI established the map as the first piece proving Evan had been in the tunnel and attempted to memorize the structure for escape. The map's over 80% match with GIS, LiDAR, and USGS data reinforced that the drawer had direct on-site observation. The map became the primary reference axis in the reconstruction phase. Next, investigators integrated the map with crime scene examination results. The match between the three-cell structure, 20-foot vertical shaft, and manually improved horizontal tunnel confirmed the tunnel as the primary detention site throughout the 5 years. The layout of wooden pallets, shackle positions, wall scratches, and floor wear matched Evan's descriptions across multiple interviews. This eliminated the possibility of Evan being held at multiple locations and showed the tunnel system was the sole place the three victims were kept from 2018 until the two deaths. In parallel, forensic pathology provided the next data layer: bone analysis, binding marks, decomposition levels, and time of death for Melissa and Caleb. Melissa's time of death fell in late 2018, early 2019, consistent with Evan's testimony that she was the first to succumb and stop responding after a few months. Caleb died in late 2019 or early 2020, aligning with the period Evan still heard his coughing and groaning before silence. These results confirmed long-term detention of all three victims, not short-term. After forensic analysis was complete, the timeline team began connecting Evan's testimony to field data and evidence. Evan described Greer bringing water after rains, matching mud deposits at the tunnel entrance, indicating Greer traversed the area during rainy days. Evan recalled wind sounds and temperature drops in winter, along with stifling heat through the ventilation pipe in summer. Cross-referencing with meteorological data from 2018 to 2023, experts confirmed the testimony matched the area's climate cycles. This allowed the FBI to anchor the time markers Evan mentioned to real-world events, building a relatively accurate temporal picture. From there, the FBI continued integrating Evan's testimony with evidence seized from Greer's home. Synthetic cord from the tunnel had identical polymer composition to cord in Greer's trash. Bolts securing shackles matched size and thread type to those in Greer's toolbox. Wooden pallets had saw marks matching the blade type Greer purchased. Ventilation metal pipes matched material to an unused pipe found in Greer's backyard. These similarities formed a direct evidence chain linking Greer to constructing and maintaining the tunnel. Sketches in Greer's notebook also matched the tunnel structure diagram when compared via shape-matching software. Similarity reached 92% in line analysis, especially at the vertical shaft and two cells. This was clinching evidence. Greer had detailed knowledge of the tunnel and noted the structure for personal purposes. Next, the FBI used movement data to tie Greer to the tunnel during the crime period. Traffic cameras recorded Greer's vehicle multiple times on routes to Gold Crown Road from 2018 to 2020, the exact period of victim deaths. Greer continuously purchased supplies like nails, bolts, rope, and hand tools in 2018, 2020, coinciding with forensic signs of tunnel repairs. Greer's hardware store purchase history showed 3 instances of buying materials within 2 days after heavy rains, consistent with the assessment that rainwater could cause minor erosion around the shaft, requiring Greer to reinforce the entrance. Finally, the FBI combined all data sources to create a unified 2018-2023 timeline. July 2018. The group of 3 abducted by Greer near Lost Horse Valley and taken into the tunnel. Late 2018. Early 2019. Melissa dies from exhaustion and injuries. Late 2019. Early 2020. Caleb dies after prolonged detention and debilitation. 2020-23. Evan held alone. Greer reduces visit frequency, restricts water and food. 2023. Evan escapes under conditions of Greer losing control or prolonged absence, carrying the hand-drawn map and reaching Highway 62 before discovery. When all evidence, map, forensics, scene, testimony, and seized items was pieced together, the FBI could fully and consistently reconstruct the 5-year journey of the 3 victims, while proving Harlan Greer was the only individual capable of accessing, building, operating, and using the detention tunnel throughout the entire 2018-2023 period. After the FBI completed the task of assembling evidence and reconstructing the entire chain of events spanning 5 years, the case file was transferred to the federal prosecutor's office to prepare the formal indictment against Harlan Greer. The federal prosecutor reviewed all the data, the hand-drawn map recovered from Evan Ryder, the bunker crime scene unlocked through forensic reconstruction, the forensic conclusions regarding the causes of death of Melissa Park and Caleb Monroe, multiple interview sessions conducted under trauma-informed protocols, along with dozens of items seized from Greer's home. Based on the investigation results, the prosecutor compiled a list of charges for which the file provided sufficient grounds to charge at the highest level. First, were 2 counts of murder in the first degree for the deaths of Melissa Park and Caleb Monroe, with the element of intent to kill through prolonged detention, causing severe debilitation and the use of violence. The nearly 1-year gap between the victims' times of death served as evidence that the killings were not accidental or impulsive, but rather a continuous series of sustained actions over an extended period, fully satisfying the premeditation element under federal law. Next was the charge of kidnapping, as Greer had abducted all 3 victims and transported them across terrain to the bunker while they were under complete control. Finally, the prosecutor added the charge of aggravated torture, based on forensic results and Evan's testimony showing that the victims were bound with shackles, restricted in movement, starved, deprived of water, and subjected to repeated injuries over a prolonged period. Once the list of charges was finalized, the prosecutor began the phase of preparing evidence for presentation to the grand jury. First, all physical evidence from the bunker crime scene was grouped into an evidence chain, including 3D scanned images, chamber diagrams, shackle positions, wall scrape marks, and soil samples. This data was used to prove that the bunker was not a natural space or temporary shelter, but a deliberately constructed and maintained detention facility. In addition, items seized from Greer's home, sketchbooks containing bunker diagrams, bolts matching the thread of the shackles, synthetic rope with composition identical to that in the bunker, hand-cut wooden pallets, and homemade equipment were categorized as evidence directly linking Greer to the bunker structure. The prosecution particularly emphasized material traceability. The polymer rope in Greer's home and the rope in the bunker had the same colorant content and molding method, minimizing any opportunity to argue that the materials were unrelated. Subsequently, The prosecutor compiled forensic documentation on the two deceased victims, including images of bones fractured by impact force, indentations on wrists, ankles from long-term shackle restraint, and time of death analysis. The forensic reports were presented as a sequence, demonstrating the continuity of the fatal conduct over time and completely ruling out randomness or self-inflicted injury. The next piece of evidence was the hand-drawn map recovered from Evan Ryder. The prosecution viewed this as key evidence, showing that Evan had been inside the bunker and understood its internal structure intuitively. The map demonstrated the ability to recall the spatial layout of the detention area after years, and when compared to the actual bunker location, it became foundational proof that Evan's testimony was authentic and consistent with forensics. Once all evidence was organized, the prosecution began developing strategies to counter points that the defense might exploit, particularly regarding the reliability of Evan's testimony. Defense attorneys could argue that Evan was debilitated, had lost sense of time, or had distorted memories due to psychological trauma. To counter this, the prosecution prepared a series of cross-references between testimony and physical evidence. Descriptions of light cycles matching measured lux levels in the bunker. Descriptions of wooden pallets, shackles, distances between chambers, and vertical shaft orientation, all aligning with the crime scene. Descriptions of Melissa ceasing to respond matching the forensically estimated time of death. Descriptions of Caleb's coughing matching injuries to the chest and skull. The prosecution also prepared expert testimony from trauma psychology specialists to explain that memories of long-term detainees may be interrupted in minor details but retain the core event structure, especially when those memories are repeated in fixed, unchanging living conditions. Another potential defense point that the prosecution anticipated was the claim that Greer lacked motive to kill or the ability to maintain the bunker. To counter this, the prosecution presented Greer's history of accessing the abandoned mine, purchase records for repair materials, movement patterns consistent with the bunker location, and notebook sketches matching the crime scene structure. The fact that each layer of evidence, forensic, behavioral, physical, and testimonial, all pointed to the same conclusion, allowed the prosecution to build a solid case file, fully meeting the standards for proving first-degree murder and kidnapping under federal guidelines. Upon completing the indictment, the prosecution was ready to bring the case before the grand jury with a complete and consistent set of evidence proving Harlan Greer's responsibility for the deaths of Melissa Park and Caleb Monroe, as well as the 5-year detention of Evan Ryder in the underground bunker system. The trial of Harlan Greer took place at the Riverside Federal Courthouse after the indictment was approved, with a jury of 12 members and 2 alternates, all carefully selected due to the case's complexity. Right from the opening statements, the prosecutor outlined that the entire case would be proven based on forensics, evidence seized at the scene, and the testimony of the sole surviving witness, Evan Ryder. The initial phase of the trial focused on forensics from the bunker scene. The prosecution displayed a 3D model of the bunker, created from handheld LiDAR data and full cross-sectional scans of the underground terrain, showing the 3 detention chambers, the 20-foot vertical shaft position, distances between chambers, and exact shackle locations. Forensic experts successively explained the polymer composition of the binding ropes, bone indentations from shackles, fracture patterns from impact force, and soil microenvironment analysis to establish times of death. The jury was shown annotated crime scene photos clearly depicting worn wooden pallets, wall scrape grooves, and years of accumulated dust, reinforcing that the bunker was a long-term detention site, not a temporary refuge. Following the scene forensics, the prosecution shifted to presenting the captivity timeline based on Evan's testimony and climate environmental analysis. A meteorologist was called to explain why testimony about hot-cold cycles, light penetration into the bunker, wind sounds through ventilation pipes, and heavy rain periods aligned with weather data from 2018 to 2023. The prosecution created a timeline table with 3 phases: 2018, all 3 victims alive and detained together in the bunker system; 2018, 2019, Melissa debilitated and died; 2019, 2020 Caleb died, 2020-2023. Evan survived alone in the bunker. The timeline reconstruction was presented via visual diagrams, not relying solely on testimony, but supported by forensic pathology, meteorological data, and bunker environmental analysis. Once the timeline was established, the prosecution proceeded to introduce evidence seized from Greer's home, one of the most critical parts of the trial. On the evidence table appeared boxes of bolts matching the size, thread type, and metal composition of those attaching shackles in the bunker. Synthetic rope identical to that in the chambers, wooden pallets with saw marks matching the blade type. Greer frequently purchased, and especially the sketchbook with drawings simulating the underground bunker. The prosecution used forensic overlay software to superimpose the notebook drawings onto the actual bunker model, showing over 90% alignment at key points like the vertical shaft, 2 chambers, and horizontal connectors. This was presented to the jury as direct evidence that Greer had knowledge of and complete control over the bunker system where the 2 victims died. After presenting all physical evidence, Evan Ryder was called as the primary witness. Evan entered the courtroom supported by a psychologist, but capable of providing testimony in segments. The prosecution structured questions sequentially to avoid triggering trauma symptoms, asking Evan to describe key events: the moment of attack near Lost Horse Valley, first waking in the bunker, the chamber division process, the decline of Melissa and Caleb, and the period he was held alone. Evan described his chamber structure and the locations of the other 2, the wooden pallets, shackles, darkness levels, and wind sounds, all matching forensics and the scene. When Evan mentioned the hand-drawn map he carried during escape, the prosecution displayed it and asked him to confirm each marked point. Evan explained that he drew it from memory after years of mentally visualizing an escape route. The jury was shown comparison photos between Evan's map and the GIS map, a powerful illustration of testimony accuracy. During cross-examination, the defense argued that Evan's testimony could be distorted due to prolonged stress, unstable memory, and that the map might have been drawn randomly or based on information gathered after rescue. They questioned the lack of clarity in minor details like exact days, number of Greer appearances, and intervals between food drops. However, the prosecution rebutted with forensics. Evan's bunker structure descriptions were accurate to the meter compared to LiDAR mapping. Descriptions of pallet positions, ceiling height, and ventilation direction perfectly matched the scene. Accounts of Melissa's and Caleb's decline aligned with forensic death timings. The prosecution emphasized that chronological details may be hazy, but spatial structure and event sequence memories remain stable due to repetition in an unchanging environment over years. Trauma psychology experts were also called to reinforce that long-term detainees' memory patterns match Evan's testimony. In closing arguments, the prosecution asserted to the jury that every component of the case, forensics, physical evidence, the map, timeline, testimony, all pointed to one conclusion: Harland Greer was the person who abducted, detained, and caused the deaths of the 2 hikers, while forcing Evan Ryder to survive in harsh conditions for 5 years. After weeks of trial with hundreds of documents, witness testimonies, and full forensic analyses presented, the jury entered deliberations in a tense atmosphere but with clear direction from the consistent chain of evidence. After nearly 2 days of discussion, all 12 jurors reached a unanimous verdict finding Harland Greer guilty on all charges: 2 counts of murder in the first degree, 1 count of kidnapping, and 1 count of aggravated torture. As the verdict was read aloud in the courtroom, Greer stared straight ahead without showing emotion, while the families of Melissa Park and Caleb Monroe held hands in silence, and Evan Ryder bowed his head, trying to steady his breathing. The sentencing phase occurred 1 week after the verdict. The federal judge, after reviewing the multi-year conduct, the brutality of the detention process, the defendant's preparation, and the consequences for the 3 victims, sentenced Harland Greer to 2 consecutive life terms without parole for the murder counts, plus an additional 40 years for kidnapping and aggravated torture. This sentence ensured Greer would never be eligible for release. The judge emphasized that Greer's actions demonstrated systematic control, intentional infliction of pain, and abandonment of victims to death, including maintaining the detention bunker, restricting light, food, and water for years, leading to irreversible outcomes for 2 victims and severe trauma for the survivor. For Evan Ryder, the sentence could not erase the years of captivity, but it affirmed that what he endured had been recognized and validated by the law. Following the trial, Evan continued long-term psychological treatment under a federal victim support program. Doctors assessed that he would need at least many years of therapy to partially recover social and psychological functions. Evan survived due to high resilience and strong survival instincts, but the effects of prolonged detention, loss of time orientation, fear of enclosed spaces, strong reactions to light and sound would linger long-term. Nevertheless, with support from family and care teams, he began rebuilding his life in a safer environment. For the families of Melissa Park and Caleb Monroe, the sentence brought a sense of justice but could not compensate for the loss. They had waited nearly 5 years to learn their loved one's fate, then additional years for the investigation and trial. The families stated that the greatest pain lay not only in their children's deaths, but in knowing that for many months, even years, the victims had remained alive in harsh conditions unknown to anyone. Still, they thanked the FBI, National Park Service, and federal prosecutors for pursuing the case to the end, especially for uncovering the truth hidden within the network of abandoned mines in the Joshua Tree area. For the Joshua Tree community, the case caused profound shock. For years, residents and visitors believed the 3 missing hikers were simply desert accidents, but the discovery of the detention bunker and case details forced the community to confront the reality that a secretive individual had lived reclusively, exploiting old mine systems to abduct and detain people for extended periods. After the trial, numerous community meetings were held to reassess safety around the national park. Visitors in subsequent months were more cautious in remote areas, and many hiking groups began using personal locators or traveling in larger parties. For the National Park Service, the case led to significant changes in search and rescue procedures and abandoned mine management. Prior to the case, most old mines were only marked with warning signs due to high sealing costs. Following the Greer incident, NPS coordinated with the Department of the Interior to implement a comprehensive survey of abandoned mines bordering the park, prioritizing areas near lesser-known trails. Engineering teams used LiDAR and drones to identify shafts at risk of exploitation, while establishing protocols to monitor unusual activity around trailheads, including tracking nighttime movement patterns or vehicles repeatedly appearing in old mine areas. Beyond NPS, Joshua Tree SAR also adjusted mobilization procedures. For missing persons reports, rather than solely ground searches and expanding fan patterns, ESR now integrates historical mining maps, geological data, and checks for potential underground shafts within the search radius. This is seen as a critical advancement to avoid overlooking rare but high-consequence possibilities. As the trial concluded, the community, victims' families, and Evan Ryder all faced a long road to recovery. But the court's verdict, the maximum sentence for Greer, and safety procedure changes in Joshua Tree mark the end of a nearly decade-long case, while offering hope that similar tragedies would never recur. The story above is not just a criminal case reconstructed through forensics and federal investigation, but also a clear reflection of very real issues in everyday life in the United States today. Trust in the safety of national parks, the situation of abandoned mines that have not been thoroughly managed, gaps in the SAR system, and especially the belief that adventures exploring nature are always harmless. The incident shows that just one small mistake, like turning onto an unmarked path in Lost Horse Valley, can lead to unforeseeable consequences. From the case of Evan Ryder, we see that even in an environment considered safe, like Joshua Tree National Park, reclusive individuals like Harlan Greer can still exploit the terrain, old mine systems, and visitors' lack of vigilance to commit crimes over a long period without being detected. This raises an important lesson: safety in the wilderness is never absolute, and each person must take proactive steps to protect themselves before relying on rescue forces or the NPS management system. The clearest lesson from this story is the importance of discipline when hiking. Never leave marked trails, always carry a personal locator device, update your itinerary with family, and thoroughly understand the terrain conditions, factors that many visitors in the United States often take lightly. If Evan's group had carried a locator device, Sarah could have pinpointed their last location on the very first day, instead of letting the case turn into a cold case for 5 long years. The story also emphasizes the role of the community. The case was only solved when surveillance, forensics, and survivor testimony were connected, demonstrating the importance of cooperation between federal agencies, local authorities, and the public. In modern American society, where privacy sometimes makes neighbors reluctant to pay attention to each other, this case serves as a reminder that community vigilance is part of collective safety. Finally, as Evan survived and overcame the horror that lasted 5 years, the story delivers a powerful message about resilience, the endurance and ability to rise again. No matter how dark the circumstances, humans can still survive, overcome, and tell their story to save others. If you want to continue following mysterious cases solved through investigative science and amazing survival grit like Evan Ryder's story, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new episode. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. See you in the next video, where we will continue to explore the hidden truths behind disappearances that seemed hopeless.